Hello, welcome back. This is video 2 of what seems like it's going to turn into a series of videos that would be like an introduction to the ideas and the principles involved with what I call transformation. So, and just briefly, we can say what is transformation, and as I see it, if we want to create changes in our life, how do we go about doing that? So um, there are a lot of resources that are out there that may tell you a variety of things of like change the way you think, change the way you act, change the way you see the world, change this, change that, all from making a conscious choice of acting or thinking differently. I have found that that just didn't work for me. It may work for a lot of other people, but that in itself is a lot of what got me started in this quest many years ago, in that a lot of the materials that were offered I found to be um, completely not effective, at least for me. One of the things that I found along the way, and we'll be talking about this later on down the line, is that um, different things occur differently for different people. Um, and that some things, some ideas that are presented about how things work will work well for some people, but not for others. And I found that I was one of those that many of these popular materials that were available did not work for me, and it was very, very frustrating. And so part of my work was about discovering something that would actually work, and regardless of what seemed to something always seemed to be in the way. Um, and then some of this is about sharing what I found with others, because perhaps there are some others in the world that have found similar frustrations about that the efforts to change things did not seem to go well, or did not seem to really provide the kind of results, effective results that we might want. So, went off on a little bit of a tangent there. So this is video 2. Hopefully that you found video 1 to be of enough interest to come back and continue with my rambling. And if for some reason you have found your way here to this video and have not yet watched the first video, I do recommend and encourage you to go back and look at the first video, because we did cover a lot of well, introducing some ideas that form some of the foundation for what we're working with. And again, this is coming out strictly impromptu and very much ad lib and stream of thought as I'm going through. This is just coming out of my mouth as it occurs. There's no scripting, and sorry that there is not nice fancy video production. This is just the way it is. So hopefully we'll manage to get through and stumble through. My name is Gary, by the way. I didn't mention that in the last video. It's not particularly important who I am, other than perhaps if you wish to get in contact a little later and pursue some of these methods in a little more detail. So, where are we? We're starting another video, as I've already said. We're going to continue to examine and to take these ideas a little further. This process is a bit like layers, and like the layers in an onion. We are going to develop certain ideas to kind of develop layers of understanding that we can then build on, create a foundation that we can build on to hopefully get a sense of the bigger picture as we go along, and at some point it hopefully will click into place and all kind of make sense. So we started off talking about what causes our life to occur as it does, what causes our experience of life to be the way that it is. And we talked about a process that occurs as children when we're first born. We go through a process that we are forming our views of life, our views of ourself, what do we think that it means, and that this is all based on interpretations. Now, the thing is this is much more important. It's extremely important of this process that's happening during these first few years of childhood, because it puts into place the foundation, the basis of basically everything that occurs for how our life, as I say, shows up, or what shows up in our life later on in life. So even though there may be a tendency to kind of dismiss and go, yeah, okay, so we're children and we're learning how to walk and talk and things, but there's much more to it than that. So I would like to move into this idea of what is this development stage that's happening during these first few years of childhood. And and I do pause to try to determine which way we're going to go next in this discussion. So my apologies for that this is not all smooth and following a script. But trying to create a script is what kept me stopped for a long time, that I just did not see a way to do this. So we put all that aside, and I just said, I'm just going to sit down and start talking. So hopefully that works for you. As I said before, speaking in public is not something I'm really comfortable with, so I'm still getting past my being uncomfortable about starting another video. So, back around 1990, the end of the 1980s, and then the first couple of years of the 1990s, there was a fellow named John Bradshaw that did some groundbreaking, pioneering work in the nature of family dynamics, or I should say unhealthy family dynamics. And he found that there was a relationship between these various forms of unhealthy behaviors in family dynamics that seem to be related to, what shall we say, unhealthy difficulties later on in life. A lot of his work was based on or was about such things as addiction, various forms of addiction, and he brought forth he brought the word dysfunctional behavior out to the public. He published several books and brought some of this work out. There were actually a few specials on public TV that he did. He did a couple of specials about the family itself. And then he brought out this idea of childhood, that these things were occurring during the formation, the development period of childhood. And he brought out this idea of the inner child and published this work based on this idea of the inner child, and also introduced the idea of the wounded inner child. And he published a book called Homecoming, Reclaiming and Championing Your Inner Child. So this was, his material was one of the first things that I discovered early on in this process of that is I was searching for answers, understanding. His materials was one of the first things that I found that actually seemed to make a difference. Now, John talks about, he went into a lot of detail of many of the different factors that were involved in these unhealthy dynamics in the family environment. He talks about, and I was going to mention that if you are interested in doing a little research, exploring a little deeper into these principles, I would recommend reading this book if you are interested in that. They can often be found at the used bookstores, but it does go into a good bit of detail. It may be a little bit more detail than what you need to spend your time on with this work, because I'm going to provide you with the basics that we need to understand. But he described different phases of development that the child goes through, and at different ages during this time period between the time we're born until about 6 years old, and that there were different, it's like the focus of the development changes during the time periods of age as the child is growing and developing. So for example, the early stages from birth for the first year or so is largely about the need to feel provided for and accepted, that they are being loved, and that their needs are going to be taken care of, that they have a place in the world where they're going to be safe and taken care of, that they are accepted and loved by their parents. And then a little older, like around 2 or so, that we know as the terrible twos, the shift is a little different in that the child is developing their sense of identity, and they're developing their sense of asserting their self, hence the terrible twos of learning to say no. Excuse me. Now the thing is so John suggests that there are certain needs that the child has in these phases of development. And if those needs are not being met, being satisfied, or fulfilled, then this creates I guess what we might call a conflict, or it creates this sense of need. The child has a need that is not being met, and in my opinion creates a condition of something being unresolved, that there's like a conflict or something that's not resolved. So for example, the early stages of the infant stages are a lot about acceptance or being accepted, being approved of. So someone could be affected in a way by something during those early time periods, and so their focus a lot will be on things like abandonment, or this sense of being abandoned. There could be a lot of sense of feeling not accepted, not approved. So there's a lot of emphasis on approval, being accepted, being loved. So the person may have a lot of sense of that I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, I'm not accepted. And sometimes these will be focused on one or other of the parents, or maybe both. So we're beginning to, so I went a little bit into that because that actually starts to talk about the development of what I call these patterns that show up later on in life as the stuff that causes us trouble. And so just to touch back just a tad on what I started off with about why are we talking about this stuff? The whole purpose of the whole thing of talking about transformation, for one thing, is essentially we're out to improve the quality of our experience of life. And so I say this from a standpoint of if we have things going on in our life that are creating trouble for us, discomfort, a sense of not being at ease, or it could be around behaviors or perceptions. It could be many, many different things. So these are all, I have found that there can be a wide variety of things that can be contributing to what we might say a disruption to our life. And when I began these things, this search many years ago, they were called issues, and I had issues, but more recently, I found that people don't really seem to respond well to that because none of us want to come out and say that we've got stuff that's not okay that we call issues. So I've tried to learn different language. So excuse me, a lot of my hesitancy in how I say things has been in how I have tried to find a way to communicate these ideas in a way that people will find receptive. And I started out saying things like, you can change your life. And that is, to me, the essence of what we are talking about is we want to create change in our life. But then to say, well, we create change by addressing what I call the issues did not always seem to be received well. So I try to develop different language to work with, but that's part of what I'm trying to sort through as we're talking about these things. So if we have things going on in our life that we might not like, I call those things patterns, and these things tend to show up as what I call recurring patterns. So these could be things that seem to occur in some kind of a similar manner at different times down through life. So the idea of transformation is about that if we can have an effective way to remove the cause of what has these things show up in life that's creating discomfort in our life in some way or other, whether it's emotional or mental or maybe even physical, that if we can remove the effects of that, then it can provide us with an improvement in the quality of life. So that's the goal we're after. So back to what I wanted to address today is this idea of the inner child. So what happens is that Bradshaw proposed this idea that things happen during these early development stages, that if the child had this sense or perception that I determine as a perception that their need was not being met, this created to me, it's like a sense of conflict. Now, Bradshaw proposed that sense of what I'm calling a conflict created a type of personality. So essentially what happens is there is something that happens, an event of some kind. If there are strong emotions that are associated with this event that are negative in nature, these strong emotions, along with what I found to be the perceptions that we form, the interpretations of the situation, is like it gets stuck. And that part of the self that got stuck there almost forms something like a separate personality. So the I want to say the essence, but what we come from with what Bradshaw gives us is that because of something that happened during childhood, that some aspect, that aspect of that child, of who that child was at that time, got stuck in what I refer to as our field of consciousness. Okay? And that aspect of the self, of the child that got stuck there, is like it's still living inside of us as that child that had this experience that was like a type of conflict of some sort that then turned into what he refers to as the wound that occurred to the child. Now, I have found that what we refer to as the wound, or these experiences where a wound was created, where the child felt hurt in some way, but it is a result of these strong emotions that happened that maybe we're not happy about in some way, or the child wasn't happy about. So that gets stuck there. And I've found that these can have been formed at different times during this formation period, from the time of birth until around 6 years of age or so. And this contributes to this overall sense of personality that they've described as the inner child, or the wounded inner child. And there have been other materials that have come out since he introduced all of this, also talking about this, the inner child. But I really feel Bradshaw really developed most of these theories fully, or more so. Okay, so what I'm trying to describe here is that there were experiences that the child has of events, and then this brings in what I was talking about in the last video about the interpretation that the child has in response to those events. So there are feelings that are involved, which is one of the things we talked about before, and the different aspects. So our three aspects that we're going to be dealing with a lot through all of this, again, one aspect is the feelings, our emotions. Another aspect is the mental aspect, which are our thoughts. And the other aspect is the spiritual aspect, or the beliefs that were formed. And this is really the essence of all of this, is these three types of aspects of who we are as humans, and what I call the energies that are associated with each of these three types of these aspects, that when they come together and they get stuck in the field of consciousness, they stay there. And they continue to I want to say broadcast the quality of those energies. So it's like if we had strong emotions that we had in response to a situation, and those emotions got stuck inside our memory, if you want to call it that, or what I call our consciousness field, our energy field, as it's referred to in metaphysics. And it's like a signal that keeps sending out that same quality signal that we then sense and feel. Now I got a little ahead of myself in the discussion, but this is essentially what is happening when we have these patterns that show up that we're going to be talking about in more detail, is that there was something in the past that got stuck that's somewhat like a tape loop that keeps repeating the same tape over and over and over. And this is why we have the same feelings that show up from time to time in our life later that are actually like a tape from the past that is playing again, and we're re-sensing, re-experiencing all those same feelings. And this is a little beyond where I had actually intended to talk about, but This is starting to talk about what we're dealing with. And so these things that have gotten stuck from when we were children show up in our life as adults. They influence our feelings, they influence our behaviors, they influence the way we see life, the way we see the world around us, and they influence the way we respond to life. There you go. So what I found was that by starting to understand this scenario that Bradshaw presented, of that some part of us as a child got stuck in our consciousness, and whatever that the circumstances were when this thing got stuck, that is what continues to show up in our life later on in life. Now, these can be many different things, and it can look like many different things. And we'll get a little more into discussion about what these patterns that I call them, I also call them structures, what they can look like, how they can take, what shape and form that they can take, and what they can appear as in our life. The interesting thing is that for many of us, this happens at such an early age that we just kind of accept it, and it becomes part of who we are. And we're so accustomed and familiar with it that we don't really notice that it's there and that it's going on. Unless we have, we might stop and notice, like, dramatic patterns that may be happening. Or we may just realize that we've got certain things that happen in our life that, we react to certain things. Maybe we fly off the handle about things, or blow up at someone, or the things that we call getting our buttons pushed is another term that happens. So we're starting to get toward the end of our allotted time frame for doing a recording. So I wanted to just assess as an overview to kind of wrap this up a little bit. So one thing that when I started talking in the previous video of some of the things that I found and studied over the years, I did not mention the inner child work. Just because it was an oversight, I just didn't think of it. But the inner child work is one of the key elements that I have found that provides us some understanding, provides us the means of doing something about these recurring patterns that are creating something or causing something in our life that we don't like. So understanding how these patterns work gives us a basis for at least understanding what it is that we're dealing with. Then we can start looking at other aspects of how our system of being a human being functions, and how it all fits together to function to create our experience that we have in life, so that we can then apply some of these ideas, these principles, into practical methods, practical ways of addressing and doing something about these things, so that we can essentially remove them from our, shall we say, operating system that is managing the way our life occurs. And we'll get into a little more discussion about what this operating system is that I talk about a little bit later. So I hope you found this video interesting and felt that it was worth your time to stick around and listen to me talk and ramble and babble. We will probably be having several of these videos as what I'm thinking of as like an introductory series. So I'm about run out of time. But just wanted to again mention that the whole purpose of all of this stuff is to get to a point where we can apply certain techniques, certain methods, certain principles, so that we can actually do something to address the causes of what we don't want in our life, so that we can create changes that produce improvements in the quality of our life. This is all about the quality of life. And hopefully that as we talk through these things, this can contribute to helping to improve the quality of life. So I think that's going to wrap up this video, and hopefully we'll have another video pretty soon.